The city of Jerusalem was not merely falling, it was being consumed. The air, thick with the black soot of temple fires and the acrid scent of defeat, offered no solace to the scattered survivors. What one saw were walls breached and foundations exposed, a sacred geography reduced to rubble, weeping figures dragged in chains, and the horrifying sight of a nation's soul being torn from its body. This was not just a political collapse, it was a spiritual catastrophe echoing the prophet's warnings that had been long ignored. What one heard was the distant mocking laughter of opportunistic neighbors, a sound more piercing than the battle cries. Amidst this agonizing silence of desolation, the one thing missing was fraternal aid, the compassion that should have flowed from a kinship forged in the deserts of shared ancestry, the hand of help from a house built on the same rocky history. But in that crucial hour, humanity itself seemed to have abandoned the ravaged streets of Judah. Into this crucible of crisis steps an unlikely figure, Obadiah. His name, servant of the Lord, is the only monumental thing about him, a stark contrast to the grand figures of prophetic history who span generations. He possesses no lineage of priests, no royal court connections, and no extensive archive of sermons. He is a whisper in the storm, a messenger of but a single potent chapter, yet this very anonymity underscores the truth of his divine commission. His authority emanates not from a title, but from a profound and immediate obedience to the word of God, placing him at the nexus of the celestial court. His sensitivity to the divine purpose in the midst of human cruelty transforms him from a simple servant into a formidable voice, tasked with the most severe of all judgments, a final, irrevocable sentence against the nation of Edom. The recipients of this stark message were the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, brother to Jacob. This proximity, this shared bloodline, renders their crime even more heinous. While the Babylonian hordes were executing divine judgment upon Jerusalem, Edom, instead of observing the sacred ancient duty of a brother, stood on the sidelines with predatory glee. They were not passive. They actively participated in the carnage, blocking the escape routes of the desperate refugees, looting the abandoned homes, and delivering the scattered survivors directly into the hands of the destroyers. This cruel opportunism, this rejoicing in a brother's ruin, was a moral and theological breach of the highest order, transforming the suffering of Jerusalem into the arrogance of Edom, setting the stage for an inevitable and equal divine response. Edom's confidence, the very substance of their pride, was anchored in a tangible reality, the impregnable nature of their dwelling. They had carved their civilization deep into the rose-red rock of the Selah, their capital, Petra, a city of stone fortresses seemingly placed beyond the reach of any earthly army. Their dwellings were high in the clefts of the rock, giving them an unparalleled, arrogant sense of security. The very terrain seemed to whisper a defiant challenge to the heavens. Who can bring us down to the ground? This geographical boast fed a spiritual hubris, a belief that their wealth and military engineering had elevated them beyond the reach of consequence, even the consequence dictated by the sovereign God of Israel. Their elevation was their great lie, the height from which they were predestined to fall. Before we continue with the message that sealed the fate of Edom, we would like to know, if this message of justice resonates with you, would you consider subscribing to our channel and letting us know which city you are watching from? Your support helps us share these timeless truths. The divine mandate did not arrive with a gentle whisper or a slow dawning, but with the sudden, undeniable force of a war horn sounding across the nations. Obadiah received not a suggestion of future judgment, but the immediate definitive proclamation from the Lord God. We have heard a report from the Lord, and an envoy has been sent among the nations. Rise up, let us rise against her for battle. This was the call to action, an irreversible judicial decree that pulled the veil back on celestial politics, revealing the mechanism of divine intervention. It was the moment the prophet was pulled from obscurity and thrust onto the world stage, holding a scroll containing the predetermined fate of a nation. The urgency in the divine voice was palpable, transforming the anonymous man into the final herald of a cosmic summons, ensuring that the judgment would not be merely a consequence, but a deliberate act orchestrated from the highest court. The message of divine justice was, by its very nature, a direct confrontation to the established pride of Edom. To their powerful princes, wealthy merchants, and self-assured sages, the prophet was an insignificant, almost ludicrous figure, a messenger from a defeated and ruined people. They viewed his pronouncements not as truth, but as the bitter, powerless ranting of the humiliated. Their opposition was not mere disagreement, it was contemptuous dismissal, rooted in the false security of their mountain fortresses and the depth of their intellectual conceit. They truly believed their geographical invincibility rendered any divine warning from an exiled God irrelevant. This tension, the absolute certainty of God's quiet messenger versus the deafening arrogance of the unassailable fortress, forms the core conflict, making the message of impending doom all the more shocking to a people who saw themselves as forever beyond the reach of consequence or moral accountability. The core of Obadiah's prophecy is not simply a prediction of destruction, but a relentless dissection of Edom's spiritual failing, their overwhelming toxic pride. The prophet tears away the veneer of their mighty defenses and exposes the rotten foundation beneath. He denounces their belief that their dwelling in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, granted them absolute immunity from the moral universe. God, through his messenger, declares the futility of their high perch. Though you ascend like the eagle, and though you set your nest among the stars, I will bring you down from there. This is the great alert, a sovereign declaration that no human accomplishment, no depth of wealth, and no height of engineered safety can escape the penetrating gaze and judicial reach of the Almighty. The very height they boast of becomes the measure of their impending fall. The denunciation sharpens its focus, moving from general arrogance to the specific, unforgivable crime. Their malicious joy during Jerusalem's darkest hour. The prophet itemizes the offenses with painful clarity. You should not have gazed on the day of your brother in the day of his misfortune. Neither should you have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. This was not just an act of war, it was an act of heartless betrayal, a moral cancer that delighted in the suffering of a kindred spirit. Edom had traded its familial duty for fleeting material gain. They stood on the opposing side, cheering the enemy, looting the spoils, and actively hunting down the survivors. The prophet makes it clear, to watch a brother fall and offer no aid is to participate in the murder of their dignity and the obliteration of their hope. The most profound element of the prophetic indictment is the divine commitment to reciprocity, the unyielding declaration that the exact measure of Edom's cruelty will be applied back to them. This is the moment the overarching law of justice is invoked, stripped bare of all negotiation or mitigation. The universe is not a chaotic place where actions disappear without trace. It is governed by an immutable moral constant. This principle, this sacred calculus, is distilled into the mandatory phrase that defines the judgment and anchors the core theological claim of the prophecy. It is the inescapable mirror reflecting Edom's wicked deeds, making their punishment a terrifying self-inflicted wound disguised as divine action. For as you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deed shall return upon your own head. This phrase lema is not mere poetic rhetoric. It is the structural principle of the divine court. It explains the coming devastation not as arbitrary wrath, but as meticulously calibrated justice. It means that the despoilment Edom inflicted upon Judah will be the exact despoilment they will suffer. The treachery they showed will be the treachery they receive from their own allies. The arrogance that lifted their heads in self-praise is the force that will crush their skulls into the dust. This phrase is the final, unchangeable stamp on the decree, ensuring that the judgment is universally understood as just, an action of cause and inevitable effect. The prophet paints a vivid picture of the coming reversal, a dramatic contrast intended to shatter Edom's false security. He compares the thoroughness of their coming destruction to a thief and a grape gatherer. When thieves come, they take what they want and leave some behind. When grape gatherers work, they always leave a few clusters. But when God is finished with Edom, how are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden treasures sought out? The completeness of the despoiling is emphasized. Every hidden place will be found, every secret strength exposed. This metaphorical language demonstrates the totality of the reversal. The wealthy, the secure, the boastful will find themselves poorer and more exposed than the very victims they once mocked and preyed upon. The arrogance of Edom was not merely against Judean refugees, it was a profound miscalculation of the nature of true power. They believed their alliances, their treaties, and their wealth would serve as an impenetrable shield. Yet Obadiah reveals that their trusted allies, those upon whom they leaned, would soon turn and betray them. All the men in your confederacy shall make you retreat to the border. The men at peace with you shall deceive you and prevail against you. The prophet exposes their fatal dependency, showing that human covenants are fragile threads when weighed against a divine decree. The very people they relied on for security would become the instrument of their downfall, transforming their carefully constructed political stability into a landscape of utter deceit and sudden panic. Despite the intensity and clarity of this message, the detailed list of offenses, the explicit threat, and the undeniable principle of the lema, the people of Edom remain steeped in profound indifference. Their pride acts as a spiritual anesthetic, dulling their senses to the urgency of the moment. They look up from their fortified rocks and see only the permanence of their own power, dismissing Obadiah's cry as an absurd, distant threat. Their indifference is the true measure of their spiritual death, the refusal to acknowledge moral accountability until the very moment the consequences become an unavoidable, crushing reality. This blindness intensifies the urgency of the prophetic voice, which must shout louder and clearer to penetrate the fortress walls of their hardened hearts. The urgency of the moment is amplified by the realization that Edom's judgment is inextricably linked to the day of the Lord, the great and terrible reckoning for all nations. Edom's punishment serves as a microcosm of universal justice, a clear, tangible proof that God's moral law is enforced on the world stage. The prophet is delivering a message that transcends local politics. He is proclaiming that a global standard of justice is about to be implemented. The fate of the small, proud nation dwelling in the high rocks is a signpost for all humanity, demonstrating that even those who feel safest and most untouchable will face the inescapable audit of their actions, where opportunism and cruelty are never forgotten. The climax of Obadiah's narrative is not a political maneuver, but a terrifying divine intervention revealed through visions of war and total reversal. The prophet sees not just an army advancing, but the very mountains of Edom, the source of their invincible pride, turning into mountains of destruction. This is the point of no return, where God acts through the circumstances of human warfare. The divine action is a precise mirroring of Edom's own wicked deeds. As Edom had stripped Judah bare, now a vast coalition of nations is called forth to plunder Edom so completely that even the common thieves and grape-gatherers, as previously mentioned, will appear reserved in comparison to the thoroughness of the heavenly sanctioned despoilment. This event is a powerful visual metaphor. The haughty, isolated kingdom is exposed and emptied, proving the fragility of all human defenses when weighed against the sovereign will. The terrifying visions intensify with the description of the day of the Lord descending upon Edom. The prophet witnesses the moment when the strength of Teman, Edom's center of wisdom, and the might of Esau, their ancestral spirit, will utterly fail. The renowned sages and the formidable warriors, the very pillars of their self-confidence, will be struck with sudden panic and confusion. This is a critical detail. God does not merely send an army. He dismantles their intellectual and military foundation. The wisdom that advised their opportunistic cruelty will be rendered useless, and the bravery that relied on their high fortresses will melt into fear. The result is the complete severance of Edom's security, transforming the once unassailable rock city into a symbol of divine wrath and the futility of human conceit against the eternal. The prophet's vision focuses on the ultimate betrayal, the chilling reality that the security Edom sought in alliances would be the source of its ruin. He sees the men of your confederacy, the supposed friends who shared meals and oaths, turning against them with calculated malice. They will lead Edom to the border only to push them over the edge. They will speak peace only to deliver a fatal blow. This revelation underscores the absolute vulnerability of relying on human opportunism. Edom's own principle of self-serving betrayal is reflected back onto them through their trusted partners, a devastating irony. The vision confirms that the instruments of divine justice are often the very relationships and principles that the wicked once manipulated for their own transient gain. In the face of these cataclysmic visions, Obadiah, the humble messenger, is not a detached observer. He is humanized by the weight of his mission. He is tasked with delivering a sentence of death upon an entire nation, a people connected, however cruelly, by the same patriarchal heritage as his own. The profound burden of speaking such an absolute severe judgment is palpable. The prophet acts not only as a relentless messenger, but also as a potential intercessor, even if the decree is final. His mission required him to feel the depth of the judgment, to embody the solemnity of God's justice, turning his prophetic utterance into a heavy, sorrowful declaration. He stands between the divine decree and the human consequence, a faithful servant wrestling with the terror of the sovereign word he is compelled to speak. The final visual action is the utter subjugation and humiliation of the proud nation. The mountains of Edom, previously the symbol of their invincibility, become the stage for their defeat. The prophecy sees every man of war being cut off by slaughter, leaving no one to fight for the descendants of Esau. This is the consequence of their sin against their brother Jacob, the violation of the deepest moral law leading to a comprehensive, definitive end. The intervention is a public, undeniable spectacle of justice, a declaration to all the surrounding nations that the law of reciprocity will be executed meticulously and fully. The mountains, once a testimony to their engineering and pride, become silent monuments to the terrifying justice of the Lord. The certainty of Edom's judgment is stated not as a possibility, but as an absolute historical inevitability. The prophet's singular chapter is essentially a death warrant for a nation that had existed for centuries, a solemn declaration that the destruction of Edom is both comprehensive and final. Unlike other nations that might face partial judgment or future restoration, The prophetic message concerning Edom is one of complete eradication from the international stage, a profound testament to the severity of their specific sin. This definitive pronouncement of ruin emphasizes the weight of God's justice, asserting that the temporal power and enduring monuments of Edom's rock-cut civilization are utterly incapable of warding off the sentence passed in the eternal court. This inevitable judgment is meticulously connected root and branch to the specific sin of their indifference and active hostility towards their kin. The law of cause and effect operates here with unyielding precision. The destruction is not random affliction, but a direct consequence, a divine mirror reflecting the horror of their actions on the day Jerusalem fell. Edom's crime was a spiritual opportunism, a calculated cruelty that saw their brother's deepest pain as their own greatest advantage. Obadiah ensures that the world understands that the coming desolation is the direct, unassailable result of this moral breach, an absolute assurance that the universe possesses a mechanism of ethical accountability where the mockery of affliction is repaid with utter ruin. The final exposure of Edom's error lies in the fact that they elevated pride above principle, security above sanctity, and momentary gain above eternal justice. The judgment is the necessary correction to this fatal spiritual equation. The prophet demonstrates that their reliance on inaccessible heights and deceptive alliances was a catastrophic miscalculation. The consequence is simple. The nation that thought itself unassailable will be scattered, its power completely nullified. This outcome serves as a timeless, stark warning that no nation, no individual can violate the fundamental moral law of kindness and fraternity without incurring a commensurate and often devastating reckoning. Following the stark, uncompromising clarity of Edom's irreversible judgment, the prophetic tone shifts dramatically, offering a crucial glimmer of hope that cuts through the darkness of destruction. The focus is purposefully pivoted away from the doomed heights of Edom to the sacred eternal mountain of Zion. This change in perspective ensures that the story concludes not with mere vengeance, but with the eternal fidelity of God to his covenant promises. The judgment upon the oppressor is severe, but it is executed to clear the path for the deliverance and restoration of the oppressed. This shift serves as a powerful reminder that even amidst the terrifying display of divine justice, the ultimate purpose remains the fulfillment of God's redemptive plan for his people. This promise of restoration centers on the destiny of the remnant of Jacob. The prophet declares that on Mount Zion there shall be deliverance and there shall be holiness. The house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. This future-oriented hope does not negate the suffering that Judeans endured. Rather, it guarantees that their hardship has an expiration date and that the spiritual and territorial inheritance promised by God will be fully reclaimed. The land, defiled and divided, will be purified and unified under God's righteous rule. This declaration of holiness and possession is the final assurance that the trials of God's people are temporary, while the sovereignty and faithfulness of their Lord are absolute and enduring. The phrase lema, once a terrifying sentence of retribution against Edom, is now recontextualized and repeated, but with an emphasis on its universal application for justice and peace. For as you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deed shall return upon your own head. When applied to Edom, this phrase sealed their doom. When applied to the restored people of God, it assures them of a just future. It implies that the restoration and sovereignty granted to Jacob are as certain and inevitable as the judgment pronounced upon Esau. The principle of reciprocity guarantees that the suffering inflicted unjustly will be rewarded with deliverance, confirming the perfect equity of the divine order. The final, soaring note of the prophecy rests on the absolute, unshakable truth of God's ultimate dominion. The promise concludes by declaring, "And the kingdom shall be the Lord's." This is the ultimate hope, transforming the localized political strife between two neighboring nations into an eternal, universal truth. The sovereignty belongs not to the high-dwelling, arrogant kingdom of Edom, nor to the battered remnant of Judah, but solely to the Lord of hosts. This proclamation elevates the entire narrative, assuring the listeners that beyond the current crisis and the immediate judgment, there is an ultimate reign of peace, justice, and absolute holiness, where God's will is finally and fully enacted. The legacy of the humble prophet Obadiah, contained in his single, powerful chapter, is not merely the historical footnote of Edom's destruction. It is the uncompromising declaration of the great idea. Divine judgment is immutable and justly served, ensuring that no act of cruelty, arrogance, or opportunism will escape the attention of the sovereign God. Obadiah's message stands as a spiritual anchor, confirming that the moral law of the universe is enforced with ultimate precision. He teaches that proximity of relationship, the brotherhood between Jacob and Esau, only heightens the severity of the offense. His brief, thunderous prophecy confirms that height, wealth, and power are fragile illusions when placed against the weight of moral accountability and the terrifying certainty of the law of reciprocity. The timeless lesson of this prophecy speaks directly to the individual heart today. No one is so secure, so high in the clefts of the rock, that they can afford to mock the pain or exploit the misfortune of another. The arrogance of Edom, their belief in their unassailable position, mirrors the self-sufficiency and spiritual pride that insulates many in the modern world. We are challenged to examine our own lives. Where do we stand when others fall? Do we offer a hand, or do we stand idly by, perhaps even exploiting the moment for our own advantage? The ultimate spiritual application is this: our ethical conduct toward our brother, whether defined by family, community, or humanity, is a direct reflection of our true relationship with God, who sees the heart. The narrative compels us to consider the metaphorical locust in our lives today. What are the modern forms of cruelty, indifference, or self-exalting pride that we cultivate or ignore? Is the rocky fortress in your life today your financial portfolio, your social status, your intellectual superiority, or an emotional wall that keeps you safe but isolated from the suffering of others? Obadiah's enduring question is whether we are living in a spiritual high place built on selfish gain, destined for a catastrophic fall, or on the secure foundation of justice and compassion. The judgment on Edom remains a powerful, solemn warning against the perennial human temptation to confuse temporary security with genuine, God-ordained safety. Ultimately, the book of Obadiah ends not with the triumph of destruction, but with the resolute declaration of restoration, reinforcing the ultimate sovereignty of God. The judgment on the arrogant serves a higher redemptive purpose: the establishment of the kingdom of the Lord, characterized by holiness and deliverance. Therefore, the message concludes with a declaration of faith. Though human circumstances may shift and fail, and though judgment will surely come for the proud, the ultimate reign belongs to the only one whose fidelity is guaranteed, the only true King of Zion. If this powerful message of justice and restoration has touched your heart and reminded you of the unwavering sovereignty of God, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this truth, and subscribe to our channel to continue exploring the eternal lessons of the Scriptures. The kingdom shall be the Lord's.